Okay, here's our really short review of blood. We won't spend very much time at all on this, fortunately. What is the function of blood? Well, it has a few functions. Probably one that seems fairly obvious: transport. It moves stuff around the body, stuff like nutrients, um, as well as wastes, which includes CO2, oxygen. Is it nutrient? Well, not really nutrient. It's a necessary way of obtaining energy. What else does blood do? Regulation. Some examples of regulation. Thermoregulation. It does help keep you warm or even dispel heat. Like if you get really hot, your skin might turn red because your blood is close to the surface and trying to get rid of that excess heat. Other regulation would be like, say, acid base um, balance, which we won't get into the details of, but it does serve as a buffer if you need it for acid base. Um, yeah, balance, protection. What do I mean by that? Specifically, immune protection, probably most specifically, which we'll get into when we get into the components of blood. Okay, get rid of that mess. What is blood made of? This may be familiar to a lot of you. When you take a sample of blood and put it in a centrifuge so that the heavier stuff, which is, oops, down here, will push to, well, it would be the outsides of the centrifuge. It would get pushed in this direction. And the lighter stuff is up here. So what's in here? Well, this top portion here is plasma, right there. And plasma is mostly just water. There are various proteins in here, and those proteins would include things like antibodies or proteins. And then other solutes, and you could include in here things like, sodium, glucose is in there. No, you don't need to know any of these specific, but I'm just telling you. Amino acids, um, carbon dioxide is actually dissolved, most of it inside of plasma. So those are just some other examples of solutes that are inside blood. Okay, formed elements. And the reason we call them formed elements is because they're made of cells and cellular material, but they're not all cells. So we don't generally use the term cells because some of them are parts of cells. And we'll go through each of these in turn. Erythrocytes, or RBCs, red blood cells, leukocytes, or white blood cells, and platelets. So, erythrocytes, these are your red blood cells. And hopefully most of you know these are for carrying oxygen. We'll get into a little bit of the detail of that, but not too much. No, you don't need to know all of these specific dimensions. It's just interesting to note that it is kind of a donut shaped cell. It's fairly flat in one dimension, and then round in this other dimension, and a bit of a depression in the center. So you can see it's flattened there, kind of like a donut, not quite a donut hole. And red blood cells are really good at lining up like this. They call it a rouleau. You do not need to know that term. Inside of a capillary bed, they will line up, and sometimes if they have to, they can pretty easily fold and squeeze through really tiny capillaries that are even smaller than the red blood cell itself. Here's another aside. I don't need to know this, but there's a condition called sickle cell anemia, and the cells will become kind of sickle shaped, probably more even severe than that, instead of this round shape. And they don't fold very easy. They can get caught in the capillaries, literally like a sickle that gets stuck inside of a blood vessel, and it's actually quite painful. So that's actually, it's a genetic condition, sickle cell anemia. No, I won't ask you on the exam, but that's what it does to red blood cells. It's pretty brutal. Okay, hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is a protein that you find inside of your red blood cells, and there's a lot of them. I forgot. There's a couple million or more in, so you don't need to know that number, but a lot of these protein molecules are inside a single red blood cell or a single erythrocyte. And you don't need to know all these chains, but protein has a couple beta chains, a couple alpha chains, and at the center of each of these chains, you have this thing. It's called a heme, but what I really want you to know is that the heme molecule, this is the heme molecule, there's one of them. At the very center, it has a particular ion. And this particular ion has a positive charge. And that ion, just said the name, that ion, this is the elements uh, abbreviation on a periodic table. It is slightly positive. You will know that commonly as iron. And so this is what the oxygen will bind with. So iron binds with the O2 that you inhale. That is what gives blood a red pigment, is this hemoglobin molecule is red, and it is red in part because oxygen and iron bind together. And you will find this in your everyday world. Like my truck has some rust. Rust is oxidized iron. So that is part of what gives blood a red color. It's kind of interesting. Okay, leukocytes or white blood cells. You do not need to know each of these types. All you need to know is that there's some leukocytes in there. And they make up, you don't need to know this number either, but 1 to 5%, not very much, of your red blood, or of your total blood cells are leukocytes. In fact, these are the only ones that are officially cells because they still have organelles in them, like a nucleus. So if you're getting a DNA sample from blood, it's going to be these guys that have a nucleus. The erythrocytes don't really have one anymore. In the process of being formed, the erythrocytes got rid of pretty much all their organelles and they just have hemoglobin. They're just containers of hemoglobin molecules. These terms are somewhat ridiculous because they all have granular appearance, so I don't even talk about those. It's just early microscopes couldn't see the granules in these guys. And these guys don't necessarily have a similar function either. You can see there's granules now that we have better microscopes. The one that I will mention, won't ask you on exam, the lymphocytes. These are particularly interesting because they are what I refer to as smart. Why are they smart? Because they will learn a particular pathogen, so to speak. They will encounter a pathogen, like a bacteria or virus, and they will figure out how to destroy that pathogen. And they also, in the process, create what are called memory cells. And memory cells ideally live with you your entire life. So when you encounter that pathogen again, then your body will immediately know how to respond, and it'll respond in an enormous amount of force. So you have no illness, really. You get an infection and you destroy it immediately before you get ill. And that's, of course, why we have vaccines. Hopefully we'll have a vaccine for the current virus epidemic, the global pandemic that we're experiencing right now. And that a vaccine would be a dead or weakened form of a pathogen, and it will result in lymphocytes learning how to fight it quickly and creating memory cells. So if it ever encounters that particular pathogen again, it will immediately kill it. No, you don't need to know that for the exam. All you need to know is that blood does contain these cells called leukocytes. And here's the one thing you should know about them. Their function is immunity, or they are one of the things that provides you with immunity in your body. They're the primary thing, really. There's a few other things, like we talked about microglial cells in the brain, also are for immunity. Okay, last bit of blood is the platelets. And platelets are part of the clotting process. You don't need to know the entire clotting process. It's actually quite a cascade of many, many chemical reactions. Platelets are involved. They're important to clotting. They're not the only thing. There's other clotting factors. But that's all you really need to know about platelets. Well, part of the clotting process. And also, I want you to know that they're actually cell fragments. They're not whole cells. So this term, you may have heard it before, thrombocytes in place of platelets. But the word, or the ending there, cyte, means cell. That's a misnomer. It's misnamed. It's not a whole cell. I'm going to show you how they're made, but you don't need to know this process. Inside your bone marrow, where you make all of the formed elements of your blood, you have these giant cells. There's a really big one called a megakaryocyte. And what they do is they slip their little arms. It's like kind of like an amoeba. Their arms can fit between the capillary cell walls, and they'll reach down in there, and these arms hang out. They're called proplatelets. And as these portions of your blood, I'm actually going to go like this. Oh, there we go. Okay, there's our megakaryocyte with the platelet, the proplatelet arms hanging down. And then the blood and the other elements of the blood will flow past these proplatelets and knock off little bits. Like kind of like, when an icicle is hanging down like that. And you hit it with whatever, your hand, a rock, whatever hits the icicle, and little bits of it come chipping off like this. Same idea. That's how you make platelets. So they are just tiny fragments of a cell, of this particular cell. But this cell, this megakaryocyte, never leaves the bone marrow. So it doesn't become part of your bloodstream ever. Okay, that's it for blood. That was a quick one. Very, very basics that you need to know, not much.